of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in 1940, Anthony Danesi was 23 years old when the RCMP, under orders from the government in Ottawa, arrested him and his brother at their home in Toronto. They took them away without charge, and they were interned in a camp in Petawawa. These are his words that describe the terror his family felt some 80 years ago. Quote, "My mother at the time was over 60 years old, and when she heard they were taking us away, she fainted on the floor from the shock. We were told, 'Do not touch her, leave her there.' We had to leave our home with the RCMP and a vision of my mother in a heap on the floor. Even a dog would have been treated better. On Christmas Day, my father passed away, but we were not allowed to come home to pay our respects or go to his funeral. I spent, along with my brother, 2 years and 12 days interned, seeing my mother and sister only once. God only knows how they managed. We were released and sent home to try and pick up our lives and to try and clear the debts which had accumulated." End quote. Mr. Speaker, hundreds of Italian-Canadian families during World War II were forced to try and pick up their lives and recover from a trauma that had been inflicted upon them by their government. Le 10 juin.
On June 10, 1940, the Government of Canada, then headed by Prime Minister Mackenzie King, declared that tens of thousands of Italian Canadians were enemy aliens. The federal government then ordered the internment of some of those Canadians in camps. These individuals were arrested without due process and without the fundamental rights given them under the Canadian legislation. Thousands were subject to investigation and their fingerprints were taken. A number of them were victims of intimidation and harassment.
They were viewed with suspicion by their government and treated like second-class citizens, often only because of their surname or pride in their heritage. The impacts of this gross mistreatment would last for decades and pass through generations. As leader of the official opposition on this solemn day, I want to use my time to talk about just a few of the families Canadians need to remember today. Take, for example, the Gustini family from Ontario. Giuseppe Gustini and his daughter Linda witnessed her father being taken away in handcuffs from the grocery store he owned and operated in Timmins, Ontario. Giuseppe Gustini lost his liberty and dignity because he was known for helping new immigrants from Italy arriving in Timmins with a job at his store or helping them find a job in the mines of Northern Ontario. He would get them settled and send some of their hard-earned savings back to their family in Italy. Today, Mr. Speaker, we celebrate and present awards to charitable Canadians like Giuseppe. Today, we would consider him a pillar of the community for helping people succeed in their new country. But in 1940, our country stripped the Gustini family of a husband and a father. The trauma was something his daughter Linda remembered for the rest of her life. She passed along this difficult family story to her children. And I know that her son Joe, Giuseppe's grandson, is watching from his home in Barrie, Ontario today. I hope your family finds some comfort in this recognition today of the suffering caused to your family. William Casanova was just 9 years old when he witnessed the arrest of his father, Erminio Casanova, at their home in Windsor, Ontario. After almost 2 years of internment, Erminio was released, but tragically died only a few months later. William wrote that his family had lost their dignity, their pride, and their financial security. His mother suffered mental trauma from his father's internment and was institutionalized for nearly 15 years. Another example of a family broken. Les conséquences d'être accusé.
The consequences of being accused of being enemy aliens by one's own country tore the soul from these countries. The consequences left deep wounds in our country's Italo-Canadian communities. Some families changed their names in order to hide their connection to this time of our history. Others moved to another province. Many even left Canada to escape internment.
I want to thank Dr. Anna Maria Castrilli for sharing with me some of the letters from internees and their families so that my remarks could lend a voice to citizens that were failed long ago. En 1990, ces lettres.
In 1990, these letters and souvenirs were collected by the National Congress of Italian Canadians. The goal was to inform Canadians about this dark chapter of our history. That same year, the Congress, as well as Italian Canadian cultural and heritage organizations, welcomed Prime Minister Brian Mulroney in Toronto. Hundreds of people, many victims who were still alive at the time, attended the event.
What Prime Minister Brian Mulroney said this day over 30 years ago now is worth repeating in this chapter today. Quote, "What happened to many Italian Canadians is deeply offensive to the simple notion of respect for human dignity and the presumption of innocence. The brutal injustice was inflicted arbitrarily, not only on individuals suspected of being security risks, but also on individuals whose only crime was being of Italian origin. It was often, in the simplest of terms, an act of prejudice, organized and carried out under the law, but prejudice nonetheless. This kind of behavior was not then, is not now, and never will be acceptable as a civilized nation that purports to respect the rule of law. On behalf of the Government of Canada and the people of Canada, I offer a full and unqualified apology for the wrongs done to our fellow Canadians of Italian origin during World War II. Monsieur le Président, j'aurais aimé.
Mr. Speaker, I would have liked for members of the Italian Canadian community be present here with us today. Unfortunately, I know that public health restrictions due to COVID-19 do not allow this.
Whether it was the apology from Prime Minister Mulroney at an event hosted by the Italian Canadian community in 1990, or the one delivered today in our House of Commons, both are equally important. They acknowledge the pain caused to thousands of Canadians by their own government. We cannot heal the trauma inflicted upon the Danesi family. We cannot help a young Linda Gustini or William Casanova forget the terror of watching their fathers being taken away from them in their family store or in their home, Mr. Speaker. Ce que nous devons faire aujourd'hui, c'est...
What we must do today is to apologize to their descendants. We must recognize the deep impact that these events had on their families. We have to show that we will never forget this sad chapter of our history, as well as the costs in human lives.
Also remember that from our earliest history, millions have come to Canada for a better life and have contributed to the building of our great country. Sir Wilfrid Laurier perhaps put it best, quote, "We do not want nor wish that any individual should forget the land of his origin. Let them look to the past, but let them still more look to the future. Let them look to the land of their ancestors, but let them look also to the land of their children. Let them become Canadians and give their heart, give their soul, their energy, and all their power to Canada." For over a century, Italian Canadians have indeed given their big hearts, their tireless energy, and their labor to Canada. Les Italo-Canadiens ont toujours...
Italian Canadians have always looked to the future. They contributed to shaping our history, even in the face of discrimination and adversity. That makes their contribution to our country even more powerful.
I know from speaking about the 1990 apology with Prime Minister Mulroney and former Senator Consiglio Danino that the Italian-Canadian community wanted to celebrate their contributions in equal measure to preserving the history of the internment, discrimination, and hardship. Prime Minister Mulroney urged his audience to look at the impressive Toronto skyline after they left the event that day. Just look at it, he said. The first generation of Italian immigrants to Canada built those buildings. The second generation owns them. That, my friends and colleagues, is the Canada we are all, regardless of party, trying to build, foster, and advance today. Aujourd'hui, Monsieur le Président, nous...
Today, Mr. Speaker, we are going to write a new chapter of Canada's history. A chapter that doesn't erase the injustices of the past, but that does help us look to the future.
Mr. Speaker, and it's good to see an Italian Canadian in the chair, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my colleagues in the House and of Conservative Party members from across this great country, many Italian Canadians among them, I want to add our name and the opposition's name to the apology delivered by the Prime Minister today. Thank you, Mr. President. Merci beaucoup.